All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, settle in, get comfortable, grab a drink, and pull up a chair. We're going to get started and see what we have ahead of us tonight. Simba is not actually here yet. Welcome back. This is our 11th night session of reading Cervantes' Don Quixote. We've had some interesting tangents in the last few days. I have noticed a trend. The side stories, whenever Don Quixote is not the central focus, are actually quite serious. There's very few shenanigans to be had when he's not the one in the limelight. But as soon as that focus shifts back and the man himself takes center stage, well, things tend to go off the rails pretty quickly. Sometimes even when he's not the focus. Usually just something going on in the background, such as slaying giants who are actually wineskins. All happens off camera. But I think we're more or less about finished with the side stories. I think there's one more solid chapter of side stories here where we're back in the later Crusades. And then we should be, I think, get back to our lovable protagonist. Is lovable the right word? He's fine. So, let's go ahead and see what the night has in store for us next. We'll shift back to our reading nook here. And tonight, we resume from chapter 41. As soon as I can. Yeah, at least he's not a Henry. That is true. Not even any specific Henry. Just a Henry. As we found, it's a cursed name. I'm sorry if you're a Henry, but it is what it is. Oh, Miku, hello. Thank you for joining us. Oop. I hope you are in for things to just get started. Great timing. All right, so, as I was saying, let's go ahead and get started tonight with chapter 41 of Don Quixote. Hey, I appreciate it. Whether you've been lurking or just coming in, always welcome, but the follow is greatly appreciated. All right, so, Simba has joined us now. He's never one to keep us waiting for long. All right, so, let's begin. Before 15 days were over, our renegade had already purchased an excellent vessel with room for more than 30 persons. And to make the transaction safe and lend a color to it, he thought it well to make, as he did, a voyage to a place called Social, 20 leagues from Algiers on the Oran side, where there is an extensive trade in dried figs. 2 or 3 times he made this voyage in company with the Tagarin, already mentioned. The Moors of Aragon are called Tagarins in Barbary, and those of Granada, Mudejares. But in the Kingdom of Fez, they called the Mudejares Elches. Here we are. And they are the people the king chiefly employs in war. To proceed, every time he passed with his vessel, he anchored in a cove that was not 2 crossbow shots from the gardens where Zoraida was waiting. And there the renegade, together with the 2 Moorish lads that rowed, used purposely to station himself, either going through his prayers or else practicing as a part that he meant to perform in earnest. And thus, he would go to Zoraida's garden and ask for fruit, which her father gave him, not knowing him, but though, as he afterwards told me, he sought to speak to Zoraida and tell her who he was, and that by my orders he was to take her to the land of the Christians, so that she might feel satisfied and easy. He had never been able to do so, for the Moorish women do not allow themselves to be seen by any Moor or Turk, unless their husband or father bid them. With Christian captives they permit freedom of intercourse and communication, even more than might be considered proper. But for my part, I should have been sorry if he had spoken to her, for perhaps it might have alarmed her to find her affairs talked of by renegades. But God, who ordered it otherwise, afforded no opportunity to our renegade's well-meant purpose, and he, seeing how safely he could go to Churchill and return, and anchor when and how and where he liked, and that the Tagarin, his partner, had no will but his, and that, now I was ransomed, all we wanted was to find some Christians to row, told me to look out for any I should be willing to take with me, over and above those who had been ransomed, and to engage them for the next Friday. Which he fixed upon for our departure. On this I spoke to 12 Spaniards, all stout rowers, and such as could most easily leave the city. But it was no easy matter to find so many just then, because there were 20 ships out on a cruise, and they had taken all the rowers with them. And these would not have been found were it not for their master remained at home that summer without going to sea, in order to finish a galliope that he had upon the stocks. To these men I said nothing more than that the next Friday in the evening they were to come out stealthily, one by one, and hang about Hadis Morato's garden, waiting for me there until I came. These directions I gave each one separately, with orders that if they saw any other Christians there, they were not to say anything to them, except that I had directed them to wait at that spot. This preliminary having been settled, another, still more necessary step came to be taken, which was to let Zoraida know how matters stood, that she might be prepared and forewarned, so as not to be taken by surprise if we were suddenly to seize upon her before she thought the Christian's vessel could have returned. I determined, therefore, to go to the garden and try if I could speak to her. And the day before my departure I went there under the pretense of gathering herbs. The first person I met was her father, who addressed me in the language that all over Barbary, and even in Constantinople, is the medium between captives and Moors. It is neither Morisco nor Castilian, nor of any other nation, but a mixture of all languages, by means of which we can all understand one another. In this sort of language, I say, he asked me what I wanted in his garden, and to whom I belonged. I replied that I was a slave of the Arnaud Mami, for I knew as a certainty that he was a very great friend of his, and that I wanted some herbs to make a salad. He asked me then whether I were on ransom or not, and what my master demanded for me. While these questions and answers were proceeding, the fair Zoraida, who had already perceived me some time before, came out of the house in the garden, and as Moorish women are by no means particular about letting themselves be seen by Christians, or, as I have said before, at all coy, she had no hesitation in coming to where her father stood with me. Moreover, her father, seeing her approaching slowly, called to her to come. It would be beyond my power now to describe to you the great beauty, the high-bred air, the brilliant attire of my beloved Zoraida as she presented herself before my eyes. I will content myself with saying that more pearls hung from her fair neck, her ears, and her hair than she had hairs on her head. On her ankles, which as is customary, were bare. She had carajes, or so bracelets or anklets are called in Morisco, of the purest gold, set with so many diamonds that she told me afterwards her father valued them at 10,000 doubloons. And those she had on her wrist were worth as much more. The pearls were in profusion and very fine, for the highest display and adornment of the Moorish women is decking themselves with rich pearls and seed pearls, and of these there are therefore more among the Moors than among any other people. Zoraida's father had the reputation of possessing a great number, and the purest in all Algiers, and of possessing also more than 200,000 Spanish crowns. And she, who is now mistress of me only, was mistress of all this. Whether thus adorned she would have been beautiful or not, and that she must have been in her prosperity may be imagined from the beauty remaining to her after so many hardships. For as everyone knows, the beauty of some women has its times and seasons, and is increased or diminished by chance causes, and naturally the emotions of the mind will heighten or impair it, though indeed more frequently they totally destroy it. In a word, She presented herself before me that day, attired with the utmost splendor, and supremely beautiful. At any rate, she seemed to me the most beautiful object I had ever seen. And when, besides, I thought of all I owed to her, I felt as though I had before me some heavenly being come to earth to bring me relief and happiness. As she approached her father, and told her in his own language that I was a captive belonging to his friend the Arnault Mummy, and that I had come for salad. She took up the conversation, and in that mixture of tongues I have spoken of, she asked me if I was a gentleman, and why I was not ransomed. I answered that I was already ransomed, and that by the price it might be seen what value my master set on me, as they had given 1,500 zoltanis for me. To which she replied, Hadst thou been my father's, I can tell thee, I would not have let him part with thee for twice as much. For you Christians always tell lies about yourselves, and make yourselves out to poor to cheat the Moors. That, my lady, said I. That may be, lady, said I, but indeed I dealt truthfully with my master, as I do and mean to do with everybody in the world. And when dost thou go? Said Zoraida. Tomorrow, I think, said I, for there is a vessel here from France which sails tomorrow, and I think I shall go in her. Would it not be better, said Zoraida, to wait for the arrival of ships from Spain, and go with them, and not with the French, who are not your friends? No, said I, though if there were intelligence that a vessel were now coming from Spain, it is true I might perhaps wait for it. However, it is more likely I shall depart tomorrow, for the longing I feel to return to my country, and to those I love, is so great that it will not allow me to wait for another opportunity, however more convenient, if it be delayed. No doubt thou art married in thine own country, said Zoraida, and for that reason thou art anxious to go and see thy wife. I am not married, I replied, but I have given my promise to marry on my arrival there. And is the lady beautiful to whom you hast given it? Said Zoraida. So beautiful, said I, that to describe her worthily and tell thee the truth, she is very like thee. Smooth operator up here, jeez. At this, her father laughed very heartily and said, By Allah, Christian, she must be very beautiful if she is like my daughter, who is the most beautiful woman in all this kingdom. Only look at her well, and thou wilt see I am telling the truth. Zoraida's father, as the better linguist, helped to interpret most of these words and phrases, for though she spoke the bastard language that, as I have said, is employed there, she expressed her meaning more by signs than by words. While we were still engaged in this conversation, a Moor came running up, exclaiming that 4 Turks had leaped over the fence or wall of the garden, and were gathering the fruit though it was not yet ripe. The old man was alarmed, and Zoraida too, for the Moors commonly, and so to speak instinctively, have a dread of the Turks, but particularly of the soldiers, who are so insolent and domineering to the Moors who are under their power that they treat them worse than if they were their slaves. Her father said to Zoraida, Daughter, retire into the house and shut thyself in while I go and speak to these dogs. And thou, Christian, pick thy herbs and go in peace, and Allah bring thee safe to thy own country. I bowed, and he went away to look for the Turks, leaving me alone with Zoraida, who made as if she were about to retire, as her father bade her. But the moment he was concealed by the trees of the garden, turning to me with her eyes full of tears, she said, Tameji, Cristiano, Tameji? That is to say, Art thou going, Christian? Art thou going? I made answer, Yes, lady, but not without thee. Come what may, be on the watch for me on the next Juma, and be not alarmed when thou seest us, for most surely we shall go to the land of the Christians. This I said in such a way that she understood perfectly all that passed between us, and throwing her arm round my neck, she began with feeble steps to move towards the house. But, as fate would have it, and it might have been very unfortunate if heaven had not otherwise ordered it, just as we were moving on in the manner and position I have described, with her arm around my neck, her father, as he returned after having sent away the Turks, saw how we were walking, and we perceived that he saw us. But Zoraida, ready and quick-witted, took care not to remove her arm from my neck, but on the contrary, drew closer to me and laid her head on my breast, bending her knees a little and showing all the signs and tokens of fainting, while I, at the same time, made it seem as though I were supporting her against my will. Her father came running up to where we were, and seeing his daughter in this state, asked what was the matter with her. She, however, giving no answer, he said, "No doubt she has fainted in alarm at the entrance of those dogs." And taking her from mine, he drew her to his own breast, while she, sighing, her eyes still wet with tears, said again, "Amici, Cristiano, amici." "Go, Christian, go." To this her father replied, "There is no need, daughter, for the Christian to go, for he has done thee no harm, and the Turks have now gone. Feel no alarm, there is nothing to hurt thee, for as I say, the Turks at my request have gone back the way they came." See a nice charcoal or pencil of the father coming back and seeing her swooning into his chest. Some of these arts are very, very nice. They're not always entirely easy to tell what the scene is portraying, but this one is very clear. "It was they who terrified her, as thou hast said, Signor," said I to her father. "But since she tells me to go, I have no wish to displease her. Peace be with thee, and with thy leave, I will come back to this garden for herbs, if need be, for my master says there are nowhere better herbs for salad than here." "Come back for any thou hast need of," replied Haji Morato, "for my daughter does not speak thus because she is displeased with thee or any Christian. She only meant that the Turks should go, not thou, or that it was time for thee to look for thy herbs." With this, I at once took my leave of both, and she, looking as though her heart were breaking, retired with her father. While pretending to look for herbs, I made the round of the garden at my ease, and studied carefully all the approaches and outlets, and the fastenings of the house, and everything that could be taken advantage of to make our task easy. Having done so, I went and gave an account of all that had taken place to the renegade and my comrades, and looked forward with impatience to the hour when, all fear at an end, I should find myself in possession of the prize which fortune held out to me in the fair and lovely Zoraida. The time passed at length, and the appointed day we so longed for arrived, and, all following out the arrangement and plan which, after careful consideration and many a long discussion, we had decided upon, we succeeded as fully as we could have wished. On the Friday following the day upon which I spoke to Zoraida in the garden, the renegade anchored his vessel at nightfall, almost opposite the spot where she was. The Christians who were to row were ready, and in hiding in different places round about, all waiting for me, anxious and elated, and eager to attack the vessel they had before their eyes, for they did not know the renegade's plan, but expected that they were to gain their liberty by force of arms and by killing the Moors who were on board the vessel. As soon, then, as I and my comrades made our appearance, all those that were in hiding, seeing us, came and joined us. It was now the time when the city gates were shut, and there was no one to be seen in all the space outside. When we were collected together, we debated whether it would be better first to go for Zoraida or to make prisoners of the Moorish rowers who rowed in the vessel. But while we were still uncertain, our renegade came up asking us what kept us, as it was now the time, and all the Moors were off their guard and most of them asleep. We told him why we hesitated, but he said it was of more importance first to secure the vessel, which could be done with the greatest ease and without any danger, and then we could go for Zoraida. We all approved of what he said, and so, without further delay, guided by him, we made for the vessel, and he, leaping on board first, drew his cutlass and said in Morisco, "Let no one stir from this if he does not want it cost him his life." By this, almost all the Christians were on board, and the Moors, who were faint-hearted, hearing their captain speak in this way, were cowed, and without any one of them taking to his arms, and indeed they had few or hardly any, they submitted without saying a word to be bound by the Christians, who quickly secured them, threatening them that if they raised any kind of outcry, they would be all put to the sword. This having been accomplished, and half of our party being left to keep guard over them, the rest of us, again taking the renegade as our guide, hastened towards Haji Morato's garden. And as good luck would have it, on trying the gate it opened as easily as if it had not been locked. And so, quite quietly and in silence, we reached the house without being perceived by anybody. The lovely Zoraida was watching for us at a window, and as soon as she perceived that there were people there, she asked in a low voice if we were, Mizaran. As much as to say, or ask, if we were Christians. I answered that we were, and begged her to come down. As soon as she recognized me, she did not delay an instant, but without answering a word came down immediately, opened the door, and presented herself before us all. So beautiful, and so richly attired that I cannot attempt to describe her. The moment I saw her, I took her hand and kissed it, and the renegade and my 2 comrades did the same, and the rest, who knew nothing of the circumstances, did as they saw us do, for it only seemed as if we were returning thanks to her, and recognizing her as the giver of our liberty. The renegade asked her in the Morisco language if her father was in the house. She replied that he was, and that he was asleep. Then it would be necessary to waken him, and take him with us, said the renegade, and everything of value in this fair mansion. Nay, said she, my father must stay, must not on any account be touched, and there is nothing in the house except what I shall take, and that will be quite enough to enrich and satisfy all of you. Wait a little, and you will see. And so saying, she went in, telling us she would return immediately, and bidding us to keep quiet, without making any noise. I asked the renegade what had passed between them, and when he told me, I declared that nothing should be done except in accordance with the wishes of Zoraida, who now came back with a little trunk, so full of gold crowns that she could scarcely carry it. Unfortunately, her father awoke while this was going on, and hearing a noise in the garden, came to the window, and at once perceiving that all those who were there were Christians, raising a prodigiously loud outcry, he began to cry out in Arabic, Christians! Christians! Thieves! Thieves! By which cries we were all thrown into the greatest fear and embarrassment. But the renegade, seeing the danger we were in now, and how important it was for him to effect his purpose before we were heard, mounted with the utmost quickness to where Haji Morato was, and with him went some of our party. I, however, did not dare to leave Zoraida, who had fallen almost fainting in my arms. To be brief, those who had gone upstairs acted so promptly that in an instant they came down, carrying Haji Morato with his hands bound and a napkin tied over his mouth, which prevented him from uttering a word, and warning him at the same time that to attempt to speak would cost him his life. When his daughter caught sight of him, she covered her eyes so as not to see him, and her father was horror-stricken, not knowing how willingly she had placed herself in our hands. But it was now most essential for us to be on the move, and carefully and quickly we regained the vessel, where those who had remained on board were waiting for us in apprehension of some mishap having befallen us. It was barely 2 hours after night set in when we were all on board the vessel, where the cords were removed from the hands of Zoraida's father, and the napkin from his mouth. But the renegade once more told him not to utter a word, or they would take his life. He, when he saw his daughter there, began to sigh piteously, and still more when he perceived that I held her closely embraced, and that she lay quiet without resisting or complaining, or showing any reluctance. Nevertheless, he remained silent, lest they should carry into effect the repeated threats the renegade had addressed to him. Finding herself now on board, and that we were about to give way with the oars, Zoraida, seeing her father there and the other Moors bound, bade the renegade ask me to do her the favor of releasing the Moors, and setting her father at liberty, for she would rather drown herself in the sea than suffer a father that had loved her so dearly to be carried away captive before her eyes and on her account. The renegade repeated this to me, and I replied that I was very willing to do so, but he replied that it was not very advisable, because if they were left, they would at once raise the country and stir up the city, and lead to the dispatch of swift cruisers in pursuit, and our being taken by sea or land without any possibility of escape, and that all that could be done was to set them free on the first Christian ground we reached. On this point we all agreed, Zoraida, to whom it was explained, together with the reasons that prevented us from doing at once what she desired, was satisfied likewise. And then, in glad silence, and with cheerful alacrity, each of our stout rowers took his oar, and, commending ourselves to God with all our hearts, we began to shape our course for the island of Majorca, the nearest Christian land. Owing, however, to the tramontana rising a little, and the sea growing somewhat rough, it was impossible for us to keep a straight course for Majorca, and we were compelled to coast in the direction of Oran, not without great uneasiness on our part, lest we should be observed from the town of Social, which lies on that coast, not more than 60 miles from Algiers. Moreover, we were afraid of meeting on that course one of the galiots that usually come with goods from Tetuan. Although each of us, for himself and all of us together, felt confident that if we were to meet a merchant galiot, so that it were not a cruiser, not only should we not be lost, but that we should take a vessel in which we could more safely accomplish our voyage. As we pursued our course, Zoraida kept her head between my hands so as not to see her father, and I felt that she was praying to Lela Marienne to help us. We might have made about 30 miles when daybreak found us some 3 musket shots off the land, which seemed to us deserted, and without anyone to see us. For all that, however, by hard rowing we put out a little to sea, for it was now somewhat calmer, and having gained about 2 leagues, the word was given to row by batches, while we ate something. The vessel was well provided, but the rowers said it was not a time to take any rest. Let food be served out to those who were not rowing, but they would not leave their oars on any account. This was done, but now a stiff breeze began to blow, which obliged us to leave off rowing and make sail at once and steer for Oran, as it was impossible to make any other course. All this was done very promptly, and under sail we ran more than 8 miles an hour without any fear, except that of coming across some vessel out on a roving expedition. We gave the Moorish rowers some food, and the renegade comforted them by telling them that they were not held as captives, as we should set them free on the first opportunity. The same was said to Zoraida's father, who replied, "Anything else, Christian, I might hope for, or think likely from your generosity and good behavior, but do not think me so simple as to imagine you will give me my liberty, for you would have never exposed yourselves to the danger of depriving me of it, only to restore it to me so generously, especially as you know who I am, and the sum you may expect to receive on restoring it. And if you will only name that, I here offer you all you require for myself and for my unhappy daughter there, or else for her alone, for she is the greatest and most precious part of my soul." As he said this, he began to weep so bitterly that he filled us all with compassion and forced Zoraida to look at him. And when she saw him weeping, she was so moved that she rose from my feet and ran to throw her arms round him, and pressing her face to his, they both gave way to such an outburst of tears that several of us were constrained to keep them company. But when her father saw her in full dress, and with all her jewels about her, he said to her in his own language, "What means this, my daughter? Last night, before this terrible misfortune in which we are plunged befell us, I saw thee in thy everyday and indoor garments, and now, without having had time to attire thyself, and without my bringing thee any joyful tidings to furnish an occasion for adorning and bedecking thyself, I see thee arrayed in the finest attire it would be in my power to give thee when fortune was most kind to us. Answer me this, for it causes me greater anxiety and surprise than even this misfortune itself." The renegade interpreted to us what the Moor said to his daughter. She, however, returned him no answer. When he observed in one corner of the vessel the little trunk in which she used to keep her jewels, which he well knew he had left in Algiers, and had not brought to the garden, he was still more amazed, and asked her how that trunk had come into our hands, and what there was in it. To which the renegade, without waiting for Zoraida to reply, made answer, "Do not trouble thyself by asking thy daughter Zoraida so many questions, Signor. For the one answer I will give thee will serve for all. I would have thee know that she is a Christian, and that it is she who has been the file for our chains and our deliverer from captivity. She is here of her own free will, as glad, I imagine, to find herself in this position as he who escapes from darkness into the light, from death to life, and from suffering to glory." "Daughter, is this true what he says?" cried the Moor. "It is," replied Zoraida. "That thou art in truth a Christian," said the old man, "and that thou hast given thy father into the power of his enemies?" To which Zoraida made answer, "A Christian I am, but it is not I who have placed thee in this position, for it never was my wish to leave thee, or to do thee harm, but only to do good to myself." "And what good hast thou done thyself, daughter?" said he. "Ask thou that," said she, "of Layla Marian, for she can tell thee better than I." The Moor had hardly heard these words, when with marvelous quickness he flung himself head foremost into the sea, where no doubt he would have been drowned, had not the long and full dress he wore held him up for a little on the surface of the water. Zoraida cried aloud for us to save him, and we all hastened to help, and, seizing him by his robe, we drew him in half drowned and insensible, at which Zoraida was in such distress that she wept over him as piteously and bitterly as though he were already dead. We turned him upon his face, and he voided a great quantity of water, and at the end of 2 hours came to himself. Meanwhile, the wind having changed, we were compelled to head for the land, and ply our oars to avoid being driven on shore. But it was our good fortune to reach a creek that lies on one side of a small promontory or cape, called by the Moors that of the Cavarumia, which in our language means the wicked Christian woman. For it is a tradition among them that La Cava, through whom Spain was lost, lies buried at that spot. Cava, in their language, meaning wicked woman, and Rumia, Christian. Moreover, they count it unlucky to anchor there when necessity compels them, and they never do so otherwise. For us, however, it was not the resting place of the wicked woman, but a haven of safety for our relief. So much had the sea now got up, we posted a lookout on shore, and never let the oars out of our hands, and ate of the stores the renegade had laid in, imploring God and Our Lady with all our hearts to help and protect us, that we might give a happy ending to a beginning so prosperous. At the entreaty of Zoraida, orders were given to set on shore her father and the other Moors, who were still bound, for she could not endure, nor could her tender heart bear, to see her father in bonds and her fellow countrymen prisoners before her eyes. We promised her to do this at the moment of departure, for as it was uninhabited, we ran no risk in releasing them in that place. Our prayers were not so far in vain as to be unheard by heaven, for after a while the wind changed in our favor, and made the sea calm, inviting us once more to resume our voyage with good heart. Seeing this, we unbound the Moors, and one by one put them on shore, at which they were filled with amazement. But when we came to land, Zoraida's father, who had now completely recovered his senses, he said, "Why is it, think ye, Christians, that this wicked woman is rejoiced at your giving me my liberty? Think ye it is because of the affection she bears me? Nay, verily, it is only because of the hindrance my presence offers to the execution of her base designs. And think not that it is her belief that yours is better than ours that has led her to change her religion. It is only because she knows that immodesty is more freely practiced in your country than in ours." Then, turning to Zoraida, while I and another of the Christians held him fast by both arms, lest he should do some mad act, he said to her, "Infamous girl, misguided maiden, whither in their blindness and madness art thou going in the hands of these dogs, our natural enemies? Cursed be the hour when I begot thee, cursed the luxury and indulgence in which I reared thee." But seeing that he was not likely soon to cease, I made haste to put him on shore, and thence he continued his maledictions and lamentations aloud, calling on Mohammed to pray to Allah to destroy us, to confound us, to make an end of us, and when, in consequence of having made sail, we could no longer hear what he said, we could see what he did, how he plucked out his beard and tore his hair and lay writhing on the ground. But once he raised his voice to such a pitch that we were able to hear what he said. "Come back, dear daughter! Come back to shore, I forgive thee all. Let those men have the money, for it is theirs now, and come back to comfort thy sorrowing father, who will yield up his life on this barren strand if thou dost leave him." All this Zoraida heard, and heard with sorrow and tears, and all she could say in answer was, "Allah grant that Lela Marian, who has made me become a Christian, give thee comfort in thy sorrow, my father. Allah knows that I could not do otherwise than I have done, and that these Christians owe nothing to my will, for even had I wished not to accompany them, but to remain at home, it would have been impossible for me, so eagerly did my soul urge me on the accomplishment of this purpose, which I feel to be as righteous as to thee, dear father, it seems wicked." But neither could her father hear her, nor we see him when she said this. And so, while I consoled Zoraida, we turned our attention to our voyage, in which a breeze from the right point so favored us that we made sure of finding ourselves off the coast of Spain on the morrow by daybreak. But, as good seldom or ever comes pure and unmixed, without being attended or followed by some disturbing evil that gives a shock to it, our fortune, or perhaps the curses which the Moor had hurled at his daughter, for whatever kind of father they may come from, these are always to be dreaded, brought it about that when we were now in mid-sea, and the night about 3 hours spent, as we were running with all sail set and oars lashed, for the favoring breeze saved us the trouble of using them, we saw, by the light of the moon which shone brilliantly, a square-rigged vessel, in full sail close to us, luffing up and standing across our course, and so close that we had to strike sail to avoid running afoul of her, while they too put the helm hard up to let us pass. They came to the side of the ship and asked us who we were, whither we were bound, and whence we came. But as they said this in French, our renegade said, "Let no one answer, for no doubt these are French corsairs, who plunder all comers." Acting on this warning, no one answered a word. But after we had gone a little ahead, and the vessel was now lying to leeward, suddenly they fired 2 guns, and apparently both loaded with chain shot. For with one they cut our mast in half, and brought down both it and the sail into the sea. And the other, discharged at the same moment, sent a ball into our vessel amidships, staving her in completely, but without doing any further damage. We, however, finding ourselves sinking, began to shout for help and call upon those in the ship to pick us up as we were beginning to fill. They then lay to, and lowering a skiff or boat, as many as a dozen Frenchmen, well armed with matchlocks and with their matches burning, got into it and came alongside, and seeing how few we were and that our vessel was going down, they took us in, telling us that this had come to us through our incivility in not giving them an answer. Our renegade took the trunk, containing Zoraida's wealth, and dropped it into the sea, without anyone perceiving what he did. In short, we went on board with the Frenchmen, who, after having ascertained all they wanted to know about us, rifled of us of everything we had, as if they had been our bitterest enemies. And from Zoraida they took even the anklets she wore on her feet. But the distress they caused her did not distress me so much as the fear I was in that from robbing her of her rich and precious jewels, they would proceed to rob her of the most precious jewel that she valued more than all. The desires, however, of those people do not go beyond money, but of that their covetousness is insatiable, and on this occasion it was carried to such a pitch that they would have taken even the clothes we wore as captives, if they had been worth anything to them. It was the advice of some of them to throw us all into the sea wrapped up in a sail, but their purpose was to trade at some of the ports in Spain, giving themselves out as Bretons, and if they brought us alive they would be punished as soon as the robbery was discovered. But the captain, who was the one who had plundered my beloved Zoraida, said he was satisfied with the prize he had got, and that he would not touch at any Spanish sport, but pass the Straits of Gibraltar by night, or as best he could, and make for La Rochelle, from which he had sailed. So they agreed by common consent to give us the skiff belonging to their ship, and all we required for the short voyage that remained to us. And this they did the next day on coming in sight of the Spanish coast, with which, and the joy we felt, all our sufferings and miseries were as completely forgotten as if they had never been endured by us. Such is the delight of recovering lost liberty. It may have been about midday when they placed us in the boat, giving us 2 kegs of water and some biscuit, and the captain, moved by I know not what compassion, as the lovely Zoraida was about to embark, gave her some 40 gold crowns, and would not permit his men to take from her those same garments which she has on now. We got into the boat, returning them thanks to their kindness to us, and showing ourselves grateful rather than indignant. They stood out to sea, steering for the straits. We, without looking to any compass save the land we had before us, set ourselves to row with such energy that by sunset we were so near that we might easily, we thought, land before the night was far advanced. But as the moon did not show that night, and the sky was clouded, and as we knew not whereabouts we were, it did not seem to us a prudent thing to make for the shore, as several of us advised, saying we ought to run ourselves ashore even if it were on the rocks, and far from any habitation. For in this way we should be relieved from the apprehensions we naturally felt of the prowling vessels of the Tetuan corsairs, who leave Barbary at nightfall and are on the Spanish coast by daybreak, where they commonly take some prize and then go home to sleep in their own houses. But of the conflicting counsels, the one which was adopted was that we should approach gradually, and land where we could see if the sea were calm enough to permit us. This was done, and a little before midnight we drew near to the foot of a huge and lofty mountain, not so close to the sea, but that it left a narrow space on which to land conveniently. We ran our boat up to the sand, and all sprang out and kissed the ground, and with tears of joyful satisfaction returned thanks to God our Lord for all his incomparable goodness to us on our voyage. We took out of the boat the provisions it contained, and drew it up on the shore, and then climbed a long way up the mountain, for even there we could not feel easy in our hearts, or persuade ourselves that it was Christian soil that was now under our feet. The dawn came more slowly, I think, than we could have wished. We completed the ascent in order to see it from the summit. Any habitation or any shepherd's huts could be discovered. But strain our eyes as we might, neither dwelling, nor human being, nor path, nor road could we perceive. However, we determined to push on farther, as it could not be that ere long we must see someone who could tell us where we were. But what distressed me most was to see Zoraida going on foot over that rough ground. For though I once carried her on my shoulders, she was more wearied by my weariness than rested by the rest, and so she would never again allow me to undergo the exertion. I went on very patiently and cheerfully, while I led her by the hand. Hey, good evening, Kessler. We had gone rather less than a quarter of a league when the sound of a little bell fell on our ears, a clear proof that there were flocks hard by, and looking about carefully to see if any were within view, we observed a young shepherd tranquilly and unsuspiciously trimming a stick with his knife at the foot of a cork tree. We called to him, for he, raising his head, sprang nimbly to his feet. For, as we afterwards learned, the first who presented themselves to his sight were the renegade and Zoraida, and seeing them in Moorish dress, he imagined that all the Moors of Barbary were upon him, and plunging with marvelous swiftness into the thicket in front of him, he began to raise a prodigious outcry, claiming, the Moors have landed! To arms! To arms!" We were all thrown into perplexity by these cries, not knowing what to do, but reflecting that the shouts of the shepherd would raise the country, and that the mounted coast guard would come at once to see what was the matter, we agreed that the renegade must strip off his Turkish garments and put on a captive's jacket or coat, which one of our party gave him at once, though he himself was reduced to his shirt. And so, commending ourselves to God, we followed the same road which we saw the shepherd take, expecting every moment that the coast guard would be down upon us. Nor did our expectation deceive us, For 2 hours had not passed when, coming out of the brushwood into the open ground, we perceived... Oh, there's that chime there. Yeah. We perceived some 50 mounted men swiftly approaching us at a hand gallop. As soon as we saw them, we stood still, waiting for them. But as they came close, and instead of the Moors they were in quest of, saw a set of poor Christians, they were taken aback, and one of them asked if it could be we who were the cause of the shepherd having raised the call to arms. I said yes, and as I was about to explain to him what had occurred, and whence we came and who we were, one of the Christians of our party recognized the horseman, who had put the question to us, and before I could say anything, he exclaimed, yeah, that's probably a USB deciding that it wanted to reset somewhere. And before I could say anything more, he exclaimed, "Thanks be to God, sirs, for bringing us to such good quarters. For if I do not deceive myself, the ground we stand on is that of Velez Malaga, unless, indeed, all my years of captivity have made me unable to recollect that you, senor, who ask who we are Pedro de Bustamante, my uncle." The Christian captive, who had hardly uttered these words, when the horseman threw himself off his horse and ran to embrace the young man, crying, "Nephew of my soul and life, I recognize thee now, and long have I mourned thee as dead. I and my sister, thy mother, and all thy kin that are still alive, and whom God has been pleased to preserve that they may enjoy the happiness of seeing thee. We knew long since that thou wert in Algiers, and from the appearance of thy garments and those of all this company, I conclude that ye have had a miraculous restoration to liberty." "It is true," replied the young man, "and by we will tell you all." As soon as the horsemen understood that we were Christian captives, they dismounted from their horses, and each offered his to carry us to the city of Velez Malaga, which was a league and a half distant. Some of them went to bring the boat to the city, we having told them where we had left it. Others took us up behind them, and Zoraida was placed on the horse of the young man's uncle. The whole town came out to meet us, for they had by this time heard of our arrival from one who had gone on in advance. They were not astonished to see liberated captives or captive Moors, for people on that coast are well used to see both one and the other. But they were astonished at the beauty of Zoraida, which was just then heightened, as well by the exertion of traveling as by the joy at finding herself on Christian soil, and relieved of all fear of being lost. For this had brought such a glow upon her face that unless my affection for her were deceiving me, I would venture to say that there was not a more beautiful creature in the world, at least, that I had ever seen. We went straight to the church to return thanks to God for the mercies we had received, and when Zoraida entered it, she said there were faces there like the Lemurians. We told her they were her images, and as well as he could, the renegade explained to her what they meant, that she might adore them as if each of them were the very same Lemurian that had spoken to her, and she, having great intelligence and a quick and clear instinct, understood at once all he said to her about them. Thence they took us away and distributed us all in different houses in the town. But as for the renegade, Zoraida, and myself, the Christian who came with us brought us to the house of his parents, who had a fair share of the gifts of fortune, and treated us with as much kindness as they did their own son. We remained 6 days in Velez, at the end of which the renegade, having informed himself of all that was requisite for him to do, set out for the city of Granada to restore himself to the sacred bosom of the Church through the medium of the Holy Inquisition. The other released captives took their departures, each the way that seemed best to him, and Zoraida and I were left alone, with nothing more than the crowns which the courtesy of the Frenchman had bestowed upon Zoraida, out of which I bought the beast on which she rides, and I, for the present, attending her as her father and squire, and not as her husband. We are now going to ascertain if my father is living, or if any of my brothers has had better fortune than mine has been. Though, as heaven has made me the companion of Zoraida, I think no other lot could be assigned to me. however happy, that I would rather have. The patience with which she endures the hardships that poverty brings with it, and the eagerness she shows to become a Christian, are such that they fill me with admiration, and bind me to serve her all my life. Though the happiness I feel in seeing myself hers and her mine is disturbed and marred by not knowing whether I shall find any corner to shelter her in my own country, or whether time and death may not have made such changes in the fortunes and lives of my father and brothers, that I shall hardly find anyone who knows me, if they are not alive. I have no more of my story to tell you, gentlemen. Whether it will be an interesting or a curious one, let your better judgments decide. All I can say is I would gladly have told it to you more briefly, although my fear of wearying you has made me leave out more than one circumstance. All right. That brings us to the end of chapter 41. And we have before us chapter 42. And this one is a little on the shorter side, so we'll go ahead and read this one before we take a break for the for restocking and grabbing drinks and such. But just a moment. Yeah, so the title of this one is which treats of what further took place in the inn, and several other things worth knowing. As many of these chapter titles are, they are just vague enough to mean, well, really just about anything at all. So, we'll have to see what we have next. With these words, the captive held his peace, and Don Fernando said to him, "In truth, Captain, the manner in which you have related this remarkable adventure has been such as befitted the novelty and strangeness of the matter. The whole story is curious and uncommon, and abounds with incidents that fill the hearers with wonder and astonishment. And so great is the pleasure we have found in listening to it, that we should be glad if it were to begin again, even though tomorrow were to find us still occupied with the same tale." And while he said this, Cardenio and the rest of them offered to be of service to him in any way that lay in their power, and in words and language so kindly and sincere that the captain was much gratified by their goodwill. In particular, Don Fernando offered if he would go back with him, to get his brother the Marquis to become godfather at the baptism of Zoraida, and on his own part, to provide him with the means of making his appearance in his own country with the credit and comfort he was entitled to. For all this, the captive returned thanks very courteously, although he would not accept any of their generous offers. If he'd known Don Fernando any better, he certainly would not accept anything from him. I really don't like how he's had such an about face and everyone's just like, "Oh yeah, that's fine." Yeah, right bastard that he is. By this time, night had closed in, and as it did, there came up to the inn a coach, attended by some men on horseback, who demanded accommodation, to which the landlady replied that there was not a hand's breadth of the whole inn unoccupied. "Still, for all that," said one of those who had entered on horseback, "room must be found for his lordship the judge here." At this name, the landlady was taken aback, and said, "Signor, the fact is I have no beds. But if his lordship the judge carries one with him, as no doubt he does, let him come in and welcome, for my husband and I will give up our room to accommodate his worship." "Very good, so be it," said the squire. But in the meantime, a man had got out of the coach, whose dress indicated at a glance the office and post he held, for the long robe with ruffled sleeves that he wore showed that he was, as his servant said, a judge of appeal. He led by the hand a young girl in a traveling dress, apparently about 16 years of age, and of such a high-bred air so beautiful and so graceful that all were filled with admiration when she made her appearance. And but for having seen Dorothea, Lucinda, and Zoraida, who were there in the inn, they would have fancied that a beauty like that of this maiden's would have been hard to find. But Don Quixote was present at the entrance of the judge with the young lady, and as soon as he saw him, he said, "Your worship may with confidence enter and take your ease in this castle. For though the accommodation be scanty and poor, there are no quarters so cramped or inconvenient that they cannot make room for arms and letters. Above all, if arms and letters have beauty for a guide and leader, as letters represented by your worship have in this fair maiden, to whom not only ought castles to throw themselves open and yield themselves up, but rocks should rend themselves asunder, and mountains divide and bow themselves down to give her a reception. Enter, your worship, I say, into this paradise, for here you will find stars and suns to accompany the heaven your worship brings with you here. Here you will find arms in their supreme excellence, and beauty in its highest perfection." The judge was struck with amazement at the language of Don Quixote, whom he scrutinized very carefully, no less antagonized, but astonished by his figure than by his talk. And before he could find words to answer him, he had a fresh surprise when he saw opposite to him Lucinda, Dorothea, and Zoraida, who, having heard of their new guests and of the beauty of the young lady, had come to see her and welcome her. Don Fernando, Cardenio, and the curate, however, greeted him in a more intelligible and polished style. In short, the judge made his entrance in a state of bewilderment, as well with what he saw as what he heard, and the fair ladies of the inn gave the fair damsel a cordial welcome. On the whole, he could perceive that all who were there were people of quality. But with the figure, countenance, and bearing of Don Quixote, he was at his wit's end. And all civilities having been exchanged, and the accommodation of the inn inquired into, it was settled, as it had been before settled, that all the women should retire to the garret that had been already mentioned, and that the men should remain outside, as if to guard them. The judge, therefore, was very well pleased to allow his daughter, for such the damsel was, to go with the ladies, which she did very willingly, and with part of the host's narrow bed and half of what the judge had brought with him, they made a more comfortable arrangement for the night than they had expected. The captive, whose heart had leaped within him the instant he saw the judge, telling him somehow that this was his brother, asked one of the servants who accompanied him what his name was, and whether he knew from what part of the country he came. The servant replied that he was called the licensed Juan Perez de Viedma, and that he had heard it said he came from a village in the mountains of Leon. From this statement, and what he himself had seen, he felt convinced that this was his brother, who had adopted letters by his father's advice, and had excited and rejoiced. He called Don Fernando and Cardenio and the curate aside and told them how the matter stood, assuring them that the judge was his brother. The servant had further informed him that he was now going to the Indies, with the appointment of Judge of the Supreme Court of Mexico, and he had learned likewise that the young lady was his daughter, whose mother had died in giving birth to her, and that he was very rich in consequence of the dowry left to him with the daughter. He asked their advice as to what means he should adopt to make himself known, or to ascertain beforehand whether, when he made himself known, his brother, seeing him so poor, would be ashamed of him, or would receive him with a warm heart. "Leave it to me to find out that," said the curate, "though there is no reason for supposing, Signor Captain, that you will not be kindly received, because the worth and wisdom that your brother's bearing shows him to possess do not make it likely he will prove haughty or insensible, or that he will not know how to estimate the accidents of fortune at their proper value." "Still," said the captain, "I will not make myself known abruptly, but in some indirect way." "I have told you already," said the curate, "that I will manage it in a way to satisfy us all." By this time supper was ready, and they all took their seats at the table, except the captive and the ladies, who supped by themselves in their own room. In the middle of supper, the curate said, "I had a comrade of your worship's name, Signor Judge, in Constantinople, where I was a captive for several years, and that same comrade was one of the stoutest soldiers and captains in the whole Spanish infantry, but he had a large share of misfortune, as he had of gallantry and courage." "And how was the captain called, Signor?" asked the judge. "He was called Ruy Perez de Viedma," replied the curate, "and he was born in a village in the mountains of Leon, and he mentioned a circumstance connected with his father and his brothers, which, had it not been told me by so truthful a man as he was, I should have set down as one of those fables the old women tell of the fire in winter. For he said his father had divided his property among his 3 sons, and had addressed words of advice to them sounder than any of Cato's. But I can say this much, that the choice he made of going to the wars was attended with such success, that by his gallant conduct and courage, and without any help save his own merit, he rose in a few years to be captain of infantry, and to see himself on the high road, and in position to be given the command of a corps before long. But fortune was against him, for where he might have expected her favor, he lost it, and with it his liberty, on that glorious day when so many recovered theirs, at the battle of Lepanto. I lost mine at the Goletta, and after a variety of adventures we found ourselves comrades at Constantinople. Thence he went to Algiers, where he met one of the most extraordinary adventures that ever befell anyone in the world." Here the curate went on to relate briefly his brother's adventure with Zoraida, to all which the judge gave such an attentive hearing that he never before had been so much of a hearer. The curate, however, only went so far as to describe how the Frenchman plundered those who were in the boat, and the poverty and distress in which his comrade and the fair Moor were left, of whom, he had said, had not been able to learn what became of them, or whether they had reached Spain or been carried to France by the Frenchmen. The captain, standing a little to one side, was listening to all the curate said, and watching every movement of his brother, who, as soon as he perceived the curate had made an end to his story, gave a deep sigh and said, with his eyes full of tears, "Oh, Signor, if you only knew what news you have given me, and how it comes home to me, making me show how I feel it with these tears that spring from my eyes in spite of all my worldly wisdom and self-restraint. That brave captain that you speak of is my eldest brother, who, being of a bolder and loftier mind than my older brother or myself, chose the honorable and worthy calling of arms, which was one of the 3 careers our father proposed to us, as your comrade mentioned in that fable you thought he was telling you. I followed that of letters, in which God and my own exertions have raised me to the position in which you see me. My second brother is in Peru, so wealthy that, with what he has sent to my father and to me, he has fully repaid the portion he took with him, and has even furnished my father's hands with the means of gratifying his natural generosity, while I, too, have been enabled to pursue my studies in a more becoming and creditable fashion, and so to attain my present standing. My father is still alive, though dying with anxiety to hear of his eldest son, and he prays God unceasingly that death may not close his eyes until he has looked upon those of his son. But with regard to him, what surprises me is, that having so much common sense as he had, he should have neglected to give any intelligence about himself, either in his troubles and sufferings or in his prosperity. For if his father or any of us had known of his condition, he need not have waited for that miracle of the reed to obtain his ransom. But what now disquiets me is the uncertainty whether those Frenchmen may have restored him to liberty or murdered him to hide the robbery. All this will make me continue my journey, not with the satisfaction in which I began it, but in the deepest melancholy and sadness. Oh, dear brother, that I only knew where thou art now, and I would hasten to seek thee out and deliver thee from thy sufferings, though it were to cost me suffering myself. Oh, that I could bring news to our father that art alive, even wert thou in the deepest dungeon of Barbary. His wealth, and my brother's and mine, would rescue thee thence. Oh, beautiful and generous Zoraida, that I could repay thy goodness to a brother, that I could be present at the new birth of thy soul, and at thy bridal that would give us all such happiness." All this and more the judge uttered with such deep emotion at the news he had received of his brother, that all who heard him shared in it, showing their sympathy with his sorrow. The curate, seeing then how well he had succeeded in carrying out his purpose, and the captain's wishes, had no desire to keep them unhappy any longer. So he rose from the table, and going into the room where Zoraida was, he took her by the hand, Lucinda, Dorothea, and the judge's daughter following her. The captain was waiting to see what the curate would do, when the latter, taking him with the other hand, advanced with both of them to where the judge and the other gentlemen were, and said, "Let your tears cease to flow, Signor Judge, and the wish of your heart be gratified as fully as you could desire, for you have before you your worthy brother and your good sister-in-law. He whom you see here is the Captain Viedma, and this is the fair Moor who has been so good to him. The Frenchmen I told you of have reduced them to the state of poverty you see, that you may show the generosity of your kind heart." The captain ran to embrace his brother, who placed both hands on his breast so as to have a good look at him, holding him a little way off, but as soon as he had fully recognized him, he clasped him in his arms so closely, shedding such tears of heartfelt joy that most of those present could not but join in them. The words the brothers exchanged, the emotion they showed, can scarcely be imagined. I fancy, much less put down in writing. They told each other in a few words the events of their lives. They showed the true affection of brothers in all its strength. Then the judge embraced Zoraida, putting all he possessed at her disposal. Then he made his daughter embrace her, and the fair Christian and the lovely Moor drew fresh tears from every eye. And there was Don Quixote observing all these strange proceedings attentively, without uttering a word, and attributing the whole to chimeras of knight-errantry. Yes, I'm sure Don Quixote is going to spin this into one of his own legends. Then they agreed that his captain... Oh, hang on, got somebody to ban. One moment. Yeah, do not need spammers in here. Bonk. Then they agreed that the captain and Zoraida should return with his brother to Seville, and send news to his father of his having been delivered and found, so as to enable him to come and be present at the marriage and baptism of Zoraida, for it was impossible for the judge to put off his journey, as he was informed that in a month from that time the fleet was to sail from Seville for New Spain, and to miss the passage would have been a great inconvenience to him. In short, everybody was well pleased and glad at the captive's good fortune, and, as now almost 2/3 of the night were past, they resolved to retire to rest for the remainder of it. Don Quixote offered to mount guard over the castle, lest they should be attacked by some giant or other malevolent scoundrel, covetous of the great treasure of beauty the castle contained. Those who understood him returned his thanks for the service, and they gave the judge an account of his extraordinary humor, with which he was not a little amused. Sancho Panza alone was fuming at the lateness of the hour for retiring to rest, and he, of all, was the one that made himself most comfortable, as he stretched himself on the trappings of his ass, which, as will be told farther on, cost him so dear. The ladies, then, having retired to their chamber, and the others having disposed themselves with as little discomfort as they could, Don Quixote sallied out of the inn to act as sentinel of the castle, as he had promised. It happened, however, that a little before the approach of dawn, a voice so musical and sweet reached the ears of the ladies that it forced them all to listen attentively, but especially Dorothea, who had been awake, and by whose side Doña Clara de Viedma, for so the judge's daughter was called, lay sleeping. No one could imagine who it was that sang so sweetly, and the voice was unaccompanied by any instrument. At one moment it seemed to them as if the singer were in the courtyard, at another in the stable, and as they were all attention, wondering, Cardenio came to the door and said, "Listen, whoever is not asleep, and you will hear a muleteer's voice that enchants as it chants." "We are listening to it already, signor," said Dorothea, on which Cardenio went away, and Dorothea, giving all her attention to it, made out the words of the song to be these. Alright, that brings us to the end of chapter 42. So, let's go ahead and take a short break here, where we will stand up, stretch our legs, top up our drinks, wet your whistles, and we'll be back in just a few minutes, where we'll get through another, probably 2 chapters tonight. Alright, be back in just a little bit. Thanks, guys! Alright, we are back. Cats have wandered off. So, I think we're coming up toward the end of the inn arc here, but it seems we've got at least another chapter or 2 left of this. But this inn has had so very many coincidences coming up, whether it be the inn itself or out in the wilderness nearby, between Sancho coming upon the curate and the barber, because that's one heck of a convenient coincidence, or coincidentally, the wild man in the wilderness being found to be Cardenio, and Dorothea being the woman they found out in the wilderness, who were, coincidentally linked by the Duke's son, who When they all returned to the inn, they came upon the Duke's son, as well as Lucinda, Cardenio's happy other. So, there has been, and on top of that, in addition to all of these coincidences, they came upon the wanderers, the refugees from Algiers, and to add an additional layer of coincidence on top of that, who should be coming into the inn in the middle of the night but the captive's brother? Like, we're straining disbelief on this point, or straining suspension of disbelief on this. But you know what? It's alright. Because even through all this, there's one constant. Don Quixote is out of his mind. Between the consistent mourning in the wilderness to mistaking wine skins in the middle of the night for a giant's head and the spilled wine to be the blood, to just professing the might of the sword over the pen, because of course the arms are more important than the letters. That's the one constant in this book. Don Quixote is batshit crazy. Wouldn't have it any other way. Alright, so let's resume now with this next chapter. Chapter 43, wherein is related the pleasant story of the muleteer, together with other strange things that came to pass in the inn. Yes, because they need even more strange things in the inn. Alright. Ah me, love's mariner am I, on love's deep ocean sailing. I know not where the haven lies, I dare not hope to gain it. One solitary distant star. Oh yeah, let's see, about a 0.14, I think, or no, I think BAC is percentile, so it's a 14 BAC, thereabout. One solitary distant star is all I have to guide me, a brighter orb than those of old that Palinurus lighted, and vainly drifting I am borne, I know not where it leads me, I fix my gaze on it alone, of all beside it heedless. But over cautious prudery, and coyness cold and cruel, when most I need it, these light clouds is longed for light refuse me. Bright star, goal of my yearning eyes, as thou above me beamest, when thou shalt hide thee from my sight, I'll know that death is near me. The singer had got so far when it struck Dorothea that it was not fair to let Clara miss hearing such a sweet voice. So shaking her from side to side, she woke her, saying, Forgive me, child, for waking thee, but I do so that thou mayest have the pleasure of hearing the best voice thou hast ever heard, perhaps in all thy life. Clara awoke quite drowsy, and not understanding at the moment what Dorothea said, asked her what it was. She repeated what she had said, and Clara became attentive at once. But she had hardly heard 2 lines as the singer continued, when a strange trembling seized her, as if she were suffering from a severe attack of quartan ague, and throwing her arms around Dorothea, she said, Ah, dear lady of my soul and life, why did you wake me? The greatest kindness fortune could do me now would be to close my eyes and ears so as to neither to see or hear that unhappy musician. What art thou talking about, child? Said Dorothea. Why, they say this singer is a muleteer. Nay, he is the lord of many places, replied Clara, and that one in my heart, which he holds so firmly, shall never be taken from him, unless he be willing to surrender it. Dorothea was amazed at the ardent language of the girl, for it seemed to be far beyond such experience of life as her tender years gave any promise of. So she said to her, You speak in such a way that I cannot understand you, Signora Clara. Explain yourself more clearly, and tell me what is this you are saying about hearts and places and this musician whose voice has so moved you?
Do not tell me anything now. I do not want to lose the pleasure I get from listening to the singer by giving my attention to your transports, for I perceive he is beginning to sing a new strain and a new air." "Let him, in heaven's name," replied Clara, and not to hear him, she stopped both ears with her hands, at which Dorothea was again surprised, but turning her attention to the song, she found that it ran in this fashion. "Sweet hope, my stay, that onward to the goal of thy intent does make thy way. Heedless of hindrance or impediment, have thou no fear. If at each step thou findest death is near, no victory, no joy of triumph doth the faint heart know. Unblessed is he that a bold front to fortune dares not show, but soul and sense in bondage yieldeth up to indolence. If love his wares do dearly sell, his right must be contest. What gold compares with what that thereon his stamp he hath impressed? And all men know what costeth little that we rate but low. Love resolute knows not the word impossibility, and though my suit beset by endless obstacles I see, yet no despair shall hold me bound to earth while heaven is there."
Here the voice ceased, and Clara's sobs began afresh, all which excited Dorothea's curiosity to know what could be the cause of singing so sweet, weeping so bitter. So she asked her what it was she was going to say before. On this, Clara, afraid that Lucinda might overhear her, winding her arms tightly round Dorothea, put her mouth so close to her ear that she could speak without fear of being heard by anyone else, and said, "This singer, dear Signora, is the son of a gentleman of Aragon, lord of 2 villages, who lives opposite my father's house at Madrid. And though my father had curtains to the windows of his house in winter, and lattice work in summer, in some way, I know not how, this gentleman, who was pursuing his studies, saw me, whether in church or elsewhere, I cannot tell, and, in fact, fell in love with me, and gave me to know it from the windows of his house, with so many signs and tears that I was forced to believe him, and even to love him, without knowing what it was he wanted of me. One of the signs he used to make me was to link one hand in the other to show me he wished to marry me. And though I should have been glad if that could be, being alone and motherless, I knew not whom to open my mind to, and so I left it as it was, showing him no favour, except when my father and his 2 were from home, to raise the curtain or the lattice a little, and let him see me plainly, at which he would show such delight that he seemed as if he were going mad. Meanwhile, the time for my father's departure arrived, which he became aware of, but not from me, for I have never been able to tell him of it. He fell sick, of grief, I believe, and so the day we were going away, I could not see him to take farewell of him, were it only with the eyes. But after we had been 2 days on the road, on entering the posada of a village, a day's journey from this, I saw him at the inn door, in the dress of a muleteer, and so well disguised that if I did not carry his image graven in my heart, it would have been impossible for me to recognize him. That was a failed mute. My bad there. But I knew him, and I was surprised and glad. He watched me, unsuspected by my father, from whom he always hides himself when he crosses my path on the road, or in the posadas where we halt. And as I know what he is, and reflect that for love of me he makes this journey on foot in all this hardship, I am ready to die of sorrow. And where he sets his foot, there I set my eyes. I know not what the object he has come, or how he could have got away from his father, who loves him beyond measure, having no other heir, and because he deserves it, as you will perceive when you see him. And moreover, as I can tell you, all that he sings is out of his own head, for I have heard him say he is a great scholar and poet, and what is more, every time I see him, or hear him sing, I tremble all over, and am terrified, lest my father should recognize him and come to know of our loves. I have never spoken a word to him in my life, and for all that I love him so that I could not live without him. This, dear Signora, is all I have to tell you about the musician whose voice has delighted you so much, and from it alone you might easily perceive he is no muleteer, but
lord of hearts and towns, as I told you already. Say no more, Doña Clara, said Dorothea at this, at the same time kissing her 1,000 times over. Say no more, I tell you, but wait till day comes, when I trust in God to arrange this affair of yours so that it may have the happy ending such an innocent beginning deserves. Ah, Signora, said Doña Clara, what end can be hoped for when his father is of such lofty position and so wealthy that he would think I was not fit to be even a servant to his son, much less wife? And as to marrying without the knowledge of my father, I would not do it for all the world. I would not ask anything more than that this youth should go back and leave me, perhaps with not seeing him, and the long distance we shall have to travel. The pain I suffer now may become easier, though I dare say the remedy I propose will do me very little good. I don't know how the devil this has come about, or how this love I have for him got in. I, such a young girl, not 16, and he such a mere boy, for I verily believe we are both of an age, and I am not 16 yet, for I will be 16, Michaelmas Day, next, my father says. Dorothea could not help laughing to hear how like a child Doña Clara spoke. Let us go to sleep now, Signora, said she, for the little of the night that I fancy is left to us. God will soon send us daylight, and we will set all to rights, or it will go hard with me. With this they fell asleep, and deep silence reigned all through the inn. The only persons not asleep were the landlady's daughter and her servant, Maritornes, who, knowing the weak point of Don Quixote's humor, and that he was outside the inn mounting guard in armor and on horseback, resolved, the pair of them, to play some trick upon him, or at any rate to amuse themselves for a while by listening to his nonsense. And so, as it so happened, there was not a window in the whole inn that looked outwards except a hole in the wall of a straw loft, through which they used to throw out the straw. At this hole, the two demi-damsels posted themselves, and observed Don Quixote on his horse, leaning on his pike, and from time to time sending forth such deep and doleful sighs that he seemed to pluck up his soul by the roots with each of them. And they could hear him, too, saying in a soft, tender, loving tone, "Oh, my lady Dulcinea del Toboso, perfection of all beauty, summit and crown of discretion, treasure house of grace, depositary of virtue, and finally, ideal of all that is good, honourable, and delectable in the world. What is thy grace doing now? Art thou, perchance, mindful of thy enslaved knight, who of his own free will hath exposed himself to so great perils? And all to serve thee? Give me tidings of her, O luminary of the three faces. Perhaps at this moment, envious of hers, thou art regarding her, either as she paces to and fro some gallery of her sumptuous palaces, or leans over some balcony, meditating how, whilst preserving her purity and greatness, she may mitigate the tortures this wretched heart of mine endures for her sake. What glory should recompense my sufferings, what repose my toil, and lastly, what death my life, and what reward my services? And thou, O son, that art now doubtless harnessing thy steeds in haste to rise betimes and come forth to see my lady, when thou seest her, I entreat of thee to salute her on my behalf. But have a care, when thou shalt see her and salute her, that thou kiss not her face, for I shall be more jealous of thee than thou wert of that light-footed ingrate that made thee sweat and run so on the plains of Thessaly, or on the banks of Peneus, for I do not exactly recollect where it was thou didst run on that occasion, in thy jealousy and love." Don Quixote had got so far in his pathetic speech, when the landlady's daughter began to signal to him, saying, "Signor, come over here, please." At these signals and voice, Don Quixote turned his head and saw by the light of the moon, which was then in its full splendor, that someone was calling to him from the hole in the wall, which seemed to him to be a window, and what is more, with a gilt grating, as rich castles such as he believed the inn to be ought to have. And it immediately suggested itself to his imagination that, as on the former occasion, the fair damsel, the daughter of the lady of the castle, overcome by love for him, was once more endeavoring to win his affections, and with this idea, not to show himself discourteous or ungrateful, he turned Rocinante's head and approached the hole, and as he perceived the two wenches, he said, "I pity you, beauteous lady, that you should have directed your thoughts of love to a quarter from whence it is impossible that such a return can be made to you as is due to your great merit and gentle birth, for which you must not blame this unhappy knight-errant whom love renders incapable of submission to any other than her whom the first moment his eyes beheld her, he made absolute mistress of his soul. Forgive me, noble lady, and retire to your apartment, and do not, by any further declaration of your passion, compel me to show myself more ungrateful, and if, of the love you bear me, you should find that there is anything else in my power wherein I can gratify you, provided it be not love itself, demand it of me, for I swear to you by that sweet absent enemy of mine to grant it this instant, though it be that you require of me a lock of Medusa's hair, which was all snakes, or even the very beams of the sun shut up in a vial." "My mistress wants nothing of that sort, Sir Knight," said Meritornes at this. "What, then, discreet dame, is it that your mistress wants?" replied Don Quixote. "Only one of your fair hands," said Meritornes, "to enable her to vent over it the great passion which has brought her to this loophole. It's so much to the risk of her honor, for if the lord her father had heard her, the least slice he would cut off her would be her ear." "I should like to see that tried," said Don Quixote, "but he had better beware of that, if he does not want to meet the most disastrous end that ever father in the world met for having laid hands on the tender limbs of a love-stricken daughter." Meritornes felt sure that Don Quixote would present the hand she had asked, and making up her mind what to do, she got down from the hole and went into the stable, where she took the halter of Sancho Panza's ass, and in all haste returned to the hole, just as Don Quixote had planted himself standing on Rocinante's saddle in order to reach the grated window, where he supposed the lovelorn damsel to be. And giving her his hand, he said, "Lady, take this hand, or rather this scourge of the evil doers of the earth. Take, I say, this hand, which no other hand of woman has ever touched. Not even hers, who has complete possession of my entire body. I present it to you, not that you may kiss it, but that you may observe the contexture of the sinews, the close network of the muscles, the breadth and capacity of the veins, whence you may infer what must be the strength of the arm that has such a hand." "That we shall see presently," said Meritornes, and, making a running knot on the halter, she passed it over his wrist, and, coming down from the hole, tied the other end very firmly to the bolt of the door of the straw loft. Don Quixote, feeling the roughness of the rope on his wrist, exclaimed, "Your grace seems to be grating rather than caressing my hand. Treat it not so harshly, for it is not to blame for the offence my resolution has given you. Nor is it just to wreak all your vengeance on so small a part. Remember that one who loves you so well should not revenge herself so cruelly." But there was nobody to listen to these words of Don Quixote's, for as soon as Meritornes had tied him, she and the other made off, ready to die with laughing, leaving him fastened in such a way that it was impossible for him to release himself. Oh, ow. He was, as has been said, standing on Rocinante, with his arm passed through the hole and his wrist tied to the bolt of the door, and in mighty fear and dread of being left hanging by the arm if Rocinante were to stir one side or the other. So he did not dare to make the least movement, although from the patience and
imperturbable disposition of Rocinante, he had good reason to expect that he would stand without budging for a whole century. Finding himself fast, then, and that the ladies had retired, he began to fancy that all this was done by enchantment, as on the former occasion, when in that same castle that enchanted Moor of a carrier had belaboured him, and he cursed in his heart his own want of sense and judgment in venturing to enter the castle again, after having come off so badly the first time. It being a settled point that, with knights-errant, that when they have tried an adventure, and have not succeeded in it, it is a sign that it is not reserved for them, but for others. Therefore, they need not try it again. Nevertheless, he pulled his arm to see if he could release himself, but it had been made so fast that all his efforts were in vain. It is true he pulled it gently, lest Rocinante should move, but try as he might to seat himself in the saddle, he had nothing for it but to stand upright, or pull his hand off. Then it was he wished for the sword of Amadis, against which no enchantment whatever had any power. Then he cursed his ill fortune. Then he magnified the loss the world would sustain by his absence while he remained there enchanted, for that he believed he was beyond all doubt. Then he once more took to thinking of his beloved Dulcinea del Toboso. Then he called to his worthy squire Sancho Panza, who, buried in sleep and stretched upon the pack-saddle of his ass, was oblivious, at that moment, of the mother that bore him. Then he called upon the sages Lirgandeo and Alquif to come to his aid. Then he invoked his good friend Urganda to succor him, and then, at last, morning found him in such a state of desperation and perplexity that he was bellowing like a bull, for he had no hope that day would bring any relief to his suffering, which he believed would last forever. Inasmuch as he was enchanted, and of this he was convinced by seeing that Rocinante never stirred, much or little, and he felt persuaded that he and his horse were to remain in this state without eating, or drinking, or sleeping, until the malign influence of the stars was overpast, or until some other more sage enchanter should disenchant him. But he was very much deceived in this conclusion, for daybreak had hardly begun to appear when there came up to the inn 4 men on horseback, well equipped and accoutred, with firelocks across their saddle bows. They called out and knocked loudly at the gate of the inn, which was still shut, on seeing which Don Quixote, even where he was, did not forget to act as sentinel, and said in a loud and imperious tone, "Knights, or squires, or whatever ye be, ye have no right to knock at the gates of this castle, for it is plain enough that they who are within are either asleep, or else are not in the habit of throwing open the fortress until the sun's rays are spread over the whole surface of the earth. Withdraw to a distance, and wait till it is broad daylight, and then we shall see whether it will be proper or not to open to you." "What the devil fortress or castle is this," said one, "to make a stand on such ceremony? If you are the innkeeper, bid them open to us. We are travellers who only want to feed our horses and go on, for we are in haste." "Do you think, gentlemen, that I look like an innkeeper?" said Don Quixote. "I don't know what you look like," replied the other, "but I know that you are talking nonsense when you call this inn a castle." "A castle it is," returned Don Quixote. "Nay, more, one of the best in this whole province. And it has within it people who have had the sceptre in the hand and the crown on the head." "It would be better if they were the other way," said the cat traveller, "the sceptre on the head and the crown in the hand. But if so, maybe there is within some company of players, with whom it is common thing to have these crowns and sceptres you speak of. For in such a small inn as this, where such silence is kept, I do not believe any people entitled to crowns and sceptres can have taken up their quarters." "You know but little of this world," returned Don Quixote, "since you are ignorant of what commonly occurs in knight-errantry." But the comrades of the spokesman, growing wary of the dialogue with Don Quixote, renewed their knocks with great vehemence. So much so that the host, and not only he, but everybody in the inn awoke, and he got up to ask who knocked. It happened at this moment that one of the horses of the four who were seeking admittance went to smell Rocinante, who, melancholy, dejected, and with drooping ears, stood motionless, supporting his sorely stretched master. And as he was, after all, flesh, though he looked as if he were made of wood, he could not help giving way, and in return smelling the one who had come to offer him attentions. But he had hardly moved at all when Don Quixote lost his footing, and slipping off the saddle, he would have come to the ground but for being suspended by the arm, which caused him such agony that he believed either his wrist would be cut through or his arm torn off. And he hung so near the ground that he could just touch it with his feet, which was all the worse for him, for finding how little was wanted to enable him to plant his feet firmly, he struggled and stretched himself as much as he could to gain a footing, just like those undergoing the torture of strappado, when they are fixed at touch and no touch, who aggravate their own sufferings by their violent efforts to stretch themselves, deceived by the hope which makes them fancy that with a very little more they will reach the ground. Well, that's a little bit of a spoiler there. Thank you very much for that. Early art. I suppose it's rather obvious that that's what's going to happen, but come on. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 33, or 43, Roman numerals and such. So let's go ahead and get probably one more chapter in. And we are still at this inn, this enchanted castle that seems to be continually wearing away at Don Quixote's fraying sanity. Could be worse. The inn is a nice place to lose one's marbles. It's also nice to get back to some Don Quixote-centric chapters. This very stark difference between the side stories and the main story as far as tone and vibe. It's like multiple different books. So as we're getting back into the main story chapters, it gets a little bit more lighthearted and silly. And you know what? It's a Friday night. I'm ready for lighthearted and silly. Alright, so let's continue now with chapter 44, in which are continued the unheard of adventures of the inn. So loud, in fact, were the shouts of Don Quixote, that the landlord, opening the gate of the inn in all haste, came out in dismay, and ran to see who was uttering such cries, and those who were outside joined him. Maritornes, who had by this time roused up by the same outcry, suspecting what it was, ran to the loft, and without anyone seeing her, untied the halter by which Don Quixote was suspended, and down he came to the ground in the sight of the landlord and the travelers, who, approaching, asked him what was the matter with him that he shouted so. He, without replying a word, took the rope off his wrist, and rising to his feet, leaped upon Rocinante, braced his buckler on his arm, put his lance in rest, and making a considerable circuit of the plain, came back at a half-gallop, exclaiming, "Whoever shall say that I have been enchanted with just cause, provided my lady the Princess Micomicona grants me permission to do so, I give him the lie. Challenge him and defy him to single combat." The newly arrived travelers were amazed at the words of Don Quixote, but the landlord removed their surprise by telling them who he was, and not to mind him, as he was out of his senses. And they asked the landlord if by any chance a youth of about 15 years of age had come to that inn, one dressed like a muleteer, and of such and such an appearance, describing that of Dona Clara's lover. The landlord replied that there were so many people in the inn, he had not noticed the person they were inquiring for, but one of them, observing the coach in which the judge had come, said, "He is here, no doubt, for this is the coach he is following. Let one of us stay at the gate, and the rest go in to look for him. Or, indeed, it would be as well if one of us went round the inn.
lest he should escape over the wall of the yard. So be it, said another, and while the two of them went in, one remained at the gate, and the other made the circuit of the inn, observing all which the landlord was unable to conjecture for what reason they were taking all these precautions, though he understood they were looking for the youth whose description they had given him. It was by this time broad daylight, and for that reason, as well as in consequence of the noise Don Quixote had made, everybody was awake and up. But particularly Doña Clara and Dorotea, for they had been able to sleep but badly that night. The one from agitation at having her lover so near her, the other from curiosity to see him. Don Quixote, when he saw that not one of the four travelers took any notice of him or replied to his challenge, was furious and ready to die with indignation and wrath. And if he could have found in the ordinances of chivalry that it was lawful for a knight-errant to undertake or engage in another enterprise, when he had plighted his word and faith not to involve himself in any until he had made an end to the one to which he was pledged, he would have attacked the whole of them, and would have made them return an answer in spite of themselves. But considering that it would not become him, nor be right, to begin any new enterprise until he had established Micomicona in her kingdom, he was constrained to hold his peace and wait quietly to see what would be the upshot of the proceedings of those same travelers, one of whom found the youth they were seeking lying asleep by the side of a muleteer, without a thought of anyone coming in search of him, much less finding him. The man laid hold of him by the arm, saying, "It becomes you well indeed, Signor Don Luis, to be in the dress you wear, and well the bed in which I find you agrees with the luxury in which your mother reared you." The youth rubbed his sleepy eyes and stared for a while at him who held him, but presently recognized him as one of his father's servants, at which he was so taken aback that for some time he could not find or utter a word, while the servant went on to say, "There is nothing for it now, Signor Don Luis, but to submit quietly and return home, unless it is your wish that my lord your father should take his departure for the other world, for nothing else can be the consequence of the grief he is in at your absence." "But how did my father know what I had gone this road, and in this dress?" said Don Luis. "It was the student to whom you confided your intentions," answered the servant, "that disclosed them. Touched with pity at the distress he saw your father suffer on missing you, he therefore dispatched 4 of his servants in quest of you. And here we all are at your service, better pleased than you can imagine that we shall return so soon, and be able to restore you to those eyes that so yearn for you." "That shall be as I please, or as heaven orders," returned Don Luis. What can you please or heaven order," said the other, "except to agree to go back? Anything else is impossible." All this conversation between the two was overheard by the muleteer at whose side Don Luis lay, and, rising, he went to report that what had taken place to Don Fernando, Cardenio, and the others, who had by this time dressed themselves, and told them how the man had addressed the youth as Don, and what words had passed, and how he wanted him to return to his father, which the youth was unwilling to do. With this, and what they already knew of the rare voice that heaven had bestowed upon him, they all felt very anxious to know more particularly who he was, and even to help him, if it was attempted to employ force against him. So they hastened to where he was still talking and arguing with his servant. Dorotea at this instant came out of her room, followed by Doña Clara, all in a tremor, and calling Cardenio aside, she told him in a few words the story of the musician and Doña Clara, and he, at the same time, told her what had happened, how his father's servants had come in search of him, but in telling her so, he did not speak low enough, but that Doña Clara heard what he said, at which she was so much agitated, that had not Dorotea hastened to support her, she would have fallen to the ground. Cardenio then bade Dorotea return to her room, as he would endeavor to make the whole matter right, and they did as he desired. All the 4 who had come in quest of Don Luis had now come into the inn and surrounded him, urging him to return and console his father at once, and without a moment's delay. He replied that he could not do so on any account, until he had concluded some
business in which his life, honor, and heart were at stake. The servants pressed him, saying that most certainly they would not return without him, and that they would take him away whether he liked it or not.
"You shall not do that," replied Don Luis, "unless you take me dead, though however you take me, it will be without life."
By this time, most of those in the inn had been attracted by the dispute, but particularly Cardenio, Don Fernando, his companions, the judge, the curate, the barber, and Don Quixote, for he now considered there was no necessity for mounting guard over the castle any longer. Oh yeah, so he just attracted the attention of literally everyone, or all the men, at least, in the inn. Okay, cool, thanks. Cardenio, being already acquainted with the young man's story, asked the men who wanted to take him away what object they had in seeking to carry off this youth against our will.
"Our object," said one of the four, "is to save the life of his father, who is in danger of losing it through this gentleman's disappearance."
Upon this, Don Luis exclaimed,
"There is no need to make my affairs public here. I am free, and I will return if I please. And if not, none of you shall compel me."
"Reason will compel your worship," said the man, "and if it has no power over you, it has power over us, to make us do what we came for, and what it is our duty to do."
"Let us hear what the whole affair is about," said the judge at this, but the man, who knew him as a neighbor of theirs, replied,
Do you not know this gentleman, Signor Judge? He is the son of your neighbor, who has run away from his father's house in a dress so unbecoming his rank as your worship may perceive."
The judge, on this, looked at him more carefully and recognized him, and embracing him said,
"What folly is this, Signor Don Luis? Or what can have been the cause that could have induced you to come here in this way, and in this dress, which so ill becomes your condition?"
Tears came into the eyes of the young man, and he was unable to utter a word in reply to the judge, who told the four servants not to be uneasy, for all would be satisfactorily settled. And then, taking Don Luis by the hand, he drew him aside and asked the reason of his having come there. But while he was questioning him, they heard a loud outcry at the gate of the inn, the cause of which was that two of the guests who had passed the night there, seeing everybody busy and finding out what it was the four men wanted, had conceived the idea of going off without paying what they owed. But the landlord, who minded his own affairs more than other people's, caught them going out of the gate and demanded his reckoning, abusing them of their dishonesty with such language that he drove them to reply with their fists. And so they began to lay on him in such a style that the poor man was forced to cry out and call for help. The landlady and her daughter could see no one more free to give aid than Don Quixote, and to him their daughter said,
"Sir Knight, by the virtue God has given you, help my poor father, for two wicked men are beating him to a mummy."
To which Don Quixote very deliberately and phlegmatically replied,
"Fair damsel, at the present moment your request is inopportune, for I am debarred from involving myself in any adventure until I have brought to a happy conclusion one to which my word has pledged me. But that which I can do for you is what I will now mention. Run, and tell your father to stand his ground as well as he can in this battle, and on no account to allow himself to be vanquished, while I go and request permission of the Princess Micomicona to enable me to succor him in his distress. If she grants it, rest assured I will relieve him from it."
"Sinner that I am," exclaimed Maritornes, who stood by, "before you've got your permission, my master will be in the other world."
"Give me leave, Signora, to obtain the permission I speak of," returned Don Quixote, "and if I get it, it will matter very little if he is in the other world, for I will rescue him thence, in spite of all the same world can do. Or at any rate, I will give you such a revenge over those who shall have sent him there, that you will be more than moderately satisfied."
More than moderately, okay. And without saying anything more, he went and knelt before Dorothea, requesting her highness in knightly and errant phrase to be pleased to grant him permission to aid and succor the castellan of that castle,
who now stood in grievous jeopardy. The princess granted it graciously, and he at once, bracing his buckler on his arm and drawing his sword, hastened to the inn gate, where the two guests were still handling the landlord roughly. But as soon as he reached the spot, he stopped short and stood still, though Maritornes and the landlady asked him why he hesitated to help their master and husband. "I hesitate," said Don Quixote, "because it is not lawful for me to draw sword against persons of squirely condition. But call my squire Sancho to me, for this defense and vengeance are his affair and business."
Yes, of course. Leave it to Sancho. Thus matters stood at the inn gate, where there was a very lively exchange of fisticuffs and punches, to the sore damage of the landlord, and to the wrath of Maritornes, the landlady, and her daughter, who were furious when they saw the pusillanimity of Don Quixote, and the hard treatment their master, husband, and father was undergoing. But let us leave him there, for he will surely find someone to help him, and, if not, let him suffer and hold his tongue, who attempts more than his strength allows him to do. And let us go back 50 paces to see what Don Luis said in reply to the judge, whom he left questioning him privately as to his reasons for coming on foot and so meanly dressed. Yeah, that's a very valid stance. If Sancho wasn't also awful, you'd have a little bit more sympathy. Totally fair. Totally fair. To which the youth, pressing his hand in a way that showed his heart was troubled by some great sorrow, and shedding a flood of tears, made answer, "Signor, I have no more to tell you than that from the moment when, through heaven's will and our being near neighbors, I first saw Doña Clara, your daughter, and my lady, from that instant I made her the mistress of my will, and if yours, my true lord and father, offers no impediment, this very day she shall become my wife. For her I left my father's house, and for her I assumed this disguise, to follow her whithersoever she may go, as the arrow seeks its mark or the sailor the pole star. She knows nothing more of my passion than what she may have learned from having sometimes seen from a distance that my eyes were filled with tears. You know already, Signor, the wealth and noble birth of my parents, and that I am their sole heir. If this be a sufficient inducement for you to venture to make me completely happy, accept me at once as your son, for if my father, influenced by other objects of his own, should disapprove of this happiness, I have sought for myself time has more power to alter and change things than human will." With this, the love-smitten youth was silent, while the judge, after hearing him, was astonished, perplexed, and surprised, as well at the manner and intelligence with which Don Luis had confessed the secret of his heart, as at the position in which he found himself, not knowing what course to take in matters so sudden and unexpected. All the answer, therefore, he gave him was to bid him to make his mind easy for the present, and arrange with his servants not to take him back that day, so that there might be time to consider what was best for all parties. Don Luis kissed his hands by force, nay, bathed them with his tears, in a way that would have touched a heart of marble. Not to say that of the judge, who, as a shrewd man, had already perceived how advantageous the marriage would be to his daughter, though, were it possible, he would have preferred that it should be brought about with the consent of the father of Don Luis, who, he knew, looked for a title for his son. The guests had, by this time, made peace with the landlord, for by persuasion and Don Quixote's fair words, more than by threats, they had paid him what he demanded. And the servants of Don Luis were waiting for the end of the conversation with the judge and their master's decision, when the devil, who never sleeps, contrived that the barber, from whom Don Quixote had taken Mambrino's helmet, and Sancho Panza the trappings of his ass,
in return for his own, should, at this instant, enter the inn. Which said barber, as he led his ass to the stable, observed Sancho Panza engaged in repairing something or other belonging to the pack-saddle. And the moment he saw it, he knew it, and made bold attack to Sancho, exclaiming, "Ho, sir thief! I have caught you! Hand over my basin and my pack-saddle, and all my trappings that you robbed me of." Sancho, finding himself so unexpectedly assailed, and hearing the abuse poured upon him, seized the pack-saddle with one hand, and with the other gave the barber a cuff that bathed his teeth in blood. The barber, however, was not so ready to relinquish the prize he had made in the pack-saddle. On the contrary, he raised such an outcry that everyone in the inn came running to know what the noise and quarrel meant. "Here, in the name of the king and justice," he cried, "this thief and highwayman wants to kill me for trying to recover my property."
"You lie," said Sancho. "I am no highwayman. It was in fair war my master Don Quixote won these spoils."
Don Quixote was standing by at the time, highly pleased to see his squire's stoutness, both offensive and defensive. And from that time forth he reckoned him a man of mettle, and, in his heart, resolved to dub him a knight on the first opportunity that presented itself, feeling sure that the order of chivalry would be fittingly bestowed upon him. In the course of the altercation, among other things, the barber said, "Gentlemen, this pack-saddle is mine as surely as I owe God a death, and I know it as well as if I had given birth to it. And here is my ass in the stable, who will not let me lie. Only try it, and if it does not fit him like a glove, call me a rascal. And what is more, the same day I was robbed of this, they robbed me likewise of a new brass basin, never yet hand-sailed, that would fetch a crown any day." At this, Don Quixote could not help keep himself from answering, and interposing between the two and separating them. He placed the pack-saddle on the ground, to lie there in sight until the truth was established, and said, "Your worships may perceive clearly and plainly the error under which this worthy squire lies, when he calls a basin which was, is, and shall be the helmet of Mambrino, which I won from him in fair war, and made myself master of by legitimate and lawful possession. With the pack-saddle I do not concern myself, but I may tell you on that head that my squire Sancho asked my permission to strip off the caparison of this vanquished poltroon steed, and that it may adorn his own. I allowed him, and he took it, and as to its having been changed from a caparison into a pack-saddle, I can give no explanation except the usual one, that such transformations will take place in adventures of chivalry. To confirm all which, run, Sancho, my son, and fetch hither the helmet, which this good fellow calls a basin."
"Egad, master," said Sancho, "if we have no other proof of our case than what your worship puts forward, Mambrino's helmet is just as much a basin as this good fellow's comparison is a pack-saddle."
"Do as I bid thee," said Don Quixote. "It cannot be that everything in this castle goes by enchantment." Sancho hastened to where the basin was, and brought it back with him. And when Don Quixote saw it, he took hold of it and said, "Your worships may see with what a face this squire can assert that this is a basin, and not the helmet I told you of, and I swear, by the old order of chivalry I possess, that this helmet is the identical one I took from him, without anything added to or taken from it."
"There is no doubt of that," said Sancho, "for from the time my master won it until now, he has only fought one battle in it, when he let loose those unlucky men in chains. And if it had not been for this basin helmet, he would not have come off over well that time, for there was plenty of stone-throwing in that affair."
All right. That brings us to the end of chapter 44. And we find ourselves still at the inn, and with yet more coincidental reunions. We've had the servants of Don Luis's father
come by to find him, which is a little less of a coincidence and more just genuine tracking. But we've also seen if you remember, the barber who was on the way to town, who was waylaid by Sancho and Don Quixote, finding himself at the inn, and upon finding himself there, realizing and recognizing both the saddle and the basin. Yep. Small world indeed. Yeah, exactly. We might be stuck in this inn for a few more readings. We'll see. But this is a reasonably good place to stop, because if we keep going, I fear we will be in this inn all night long. So let's go ahead and shift back over to our regular readings, or regular section. So we are once again setting Sancho in a very bad way. Poor guy just can't catch a break, but I'm not sure that he deserves a break at this point. Like you said, he's got a way of being awful in his own way, and it doesn't really inspire a whole lot of sympathy. The two of them, Sancho and Don Quixote, are awful to each other consistently. If there's one thing that is very, very consistent throughout this book, it is that these two are the worst best of friends that you could possibly wish on each other. And yeah, that works. But now I'm pulling for the captive to properly go off with his bride, to be reunited with his family. He's found his brother, so hopefully he's going to be able to make it back to his father and other brother, and they can all be well and truly reunited and live in happiness there. But I have a feeling we probably will not see much more of them. They'll go off their way, and that'll be it. Although characters in this book have a way of wandering back into focus, if you haven't noticed already. Whether it be stories that haven't quite reached conclusion, or lingering bits of story thread that are brought later on. So we might be reunited with them later on. We'll see. Alright, that will be all for tonight's reading. A reminder that tomorrow is the second in our series of unarchived readings. We will be continuing our read-through of Tolkien's The Fellowship of the Ring. We made pretty good progress last time. We will be starting at 6 Eastern instead of the usual 8, so be aware of that. And this will not be archived. It will still be broadcast on both YouTube and Twitch, however, so you can catch me on whichever platform strikes your fancy. I've been having considerations down the line. I may do rebroadcasts of these at another time or another day, just to sort of fill the week. Don't feel obliged to stop in on those. It'll just be a good chance for us to increase exposure, but we'll see how that goes. Until I've got a bit of a stockpile of those recordings backed up, we'll see how they go. So, those of you on YouTube, if you have not yet, a like on the stream would be entirely welcome, as well as a subscription to the channel. It lets the algorithm know that we're doing some good things around here, and helps direct new friends to join us on our readings. We do read 4 times a week, at 8 o'clock on Tuesday, Friday, and Sunday, and at 6 o'clock on Saturdays. Those of you on Twitch, if you haven't yet, a follow on the channel will help you keep track. Yeah, so with that, let's go ahead and see if there's anyone that we can raid tonight. We've had some decent luck for a few of them, so we might have some decent success going through here. So, let's see, same category, and see who is reading tonight. Oh, you know what, let's go back to, I think last week we saw, what was his name? EM. I think he's streaming right now. Let's go back to him. That was fun. I think he's doing more Witcher. All right, we are on our way. So, say hello to Ian Majerical for us. He's reading The Witcher. Until then, thank you very much for joining us tonight, and have a lovely evening. Bye now.
The steersman bribed by Crimean Grohut. Arthur Irving-Rush. No, it's not okay. Hello, how are you doing, Arthur Irving-Rush? Good to see you. Thank you so much for the great fix. Did I have my lights turned off? I'm not going to fix it. Welcome. Now, where do you